just to introduce myself, so I'm David Mcglashan. I'm Sales and Marketing Manager at the School for Social Entrepreneurs. For those of you who might be new to SSE, so we're a charity that runs a whole series of programs and workshops designed to support charities and social enterprises to start up, to then sustain and then scale. And for this new Navigating the New Normal course, we've partnered with Lime Green Consulting. And I'm going to be handing over to Mike and Fran from Lime Green in a moment. Lime Green have been working with SSE for a number of years, and they deliver workshops around fundraising strategy, crowdfunding, and raising funds from trusts and foundations. So they're a very valuable partner for the School for Social Entrepreneurs. Just before I do hand over, however, a couple of bits of housekeeping. Firstly, if you could keep your microphone on mute, just to prevent any feedback sounds. But if during the session there are questions that come up or there's things you want answered, if you use the chat box function, which should be at the bottom of your screen, and I will collaborate those questions and put them to Fran and Mike when there is an opportunity. Other than that, Mike, Fran, I think over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dave. Just a bit of information about us. So I'm the director of Lime Green Consulting. We've been running 6 or 7 years now, and as Dave said, we've run lots of different one-day courses in partnership with the School for Social Entrepreneurs and others as well. And we're really keen to put something together in the wake of these exceptional times, as everyone keeps calling them. So I'll go through a bit more detail about what we're going to cover in a moment. Just for a bit of information about us, so at Lime Green Consulting, we work with charities and social enterprises of all shapes and sizes, but particularly with a focus on small to medium organisations or those that are trying to achieve a step change in their strategy and fundraising efforts. And we help organisations to be more strategic, become more sustainable and access more funding. So that includes things like developing business, organisational strategies, business plans, service delivery plans, etc., facilitating sessions with senior management teams and boards of trustees. We help organisations develop theories of change and provide coaching to senior leaders and fundraisers as well. We write and review fundraising strategies and work with organisations to develop new campaigns, products, etc., and provide ongoing support to fundraising teams. And we do a lot on the grant funding side as well to access funding, whether that's setting up your funding strategy, finding fundraising prospects, etc., or writing your ongoing applications. So that's just a bit of context, really, because I think it's from all of these areas and really observing the work we've done with organisations in recent months that's kind of given us the feeling that we want to run this course, and is going to give some context to what we include in it. Before we go any further, I just want to introduce Fran, who's one of our associate consultants. Fran, do you want to do a brief intro about you as well?
Yeah, hi, I'm Fran. I've been with Lime Green since earlier this year, since about 6 months now. My history is I've worked in the charity and social enterprise sector for about 20 years, most recently as the chief exec of a housing and homelessness charity in Sheffield, which had a social enterprise arm to it. So lots of experience around strategic planning, lots of experience around grant fundraising more generally, and sort of supporting that kind of culture change and change management process around boards of trustees and developing kind of, developing new approaches to old problems.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Fran. In terms of what we're going to cover today, and we were scheduled to be 11 till 12, we'll very happily overrun for a few minutes because I know we were a bit late starting. If you do need to dash off at 12, don't worry, we're recording the session, so you can always listen back to the last few minutes. And depending on how many questions we get from people, we're also happy to stick on for a few minutes after that at the end as well and answer any other questions. I'm going to start with a brief intro in a moment about why we've launched this course and what we're really looking to achieve with it. We'll then be doing an open Q&A based on some of the questions you've already submitted and any new questions you want to ask now, just about moving into the post-COVID landscape and what to expect. We'll take about half an hour or so on that, and then we'll finish with a bit more information about the course itself. Lots of people have asked some really good questions about structure and format and content and things like that, so we wanted to answer those and provide a bit more information. In terms of why we're doing this, I mean, some of this is going to sound blindingly obvious, I know, to a lot of you from your experience in your own organisations, but we've seen that COVID-19 has put a huge strain on the sector across various areas. For the purposes of this course, we've kind of tried to pick out 4 key themes, which are future funding model, financial and strategic planning, sort of future service delivery, and collaborative working as a team. But I think it's also presented some interesting opportunities to do things differently, better, and potentially more cost effectively. We've certainly found that with some of the things we're talking about. I feel slightly uncomfortable now talking about the wonders of things like Zoom today after our initial hiccup this morning, but generally it's been great, and feedback from people we've been working with and organisations we've been supporting are that there are real opportunities there to keep some of the things we've learned in recent months. And so I think all of this just really would benefit from a chance to step back and not do the whole rush back to just forgetting COVID-19 as quickly as we can, although we all want to, and going back to doing things as normal, but really reviewing some of the challenges in more detail and thinking about your long-term response, and also where there are opportunities to learn and improve, to not just discuss that, but also experiment a little. So we're looking to kind of create a group of people who are like-minded, but from different organisations and roles, to not just talk about what we want to do differently, but to have some time over a few months to start experimenting with different approaches, starting conversations with service users, your supporters, your board, whoever it might be, and trying to find some answers to what can we do differently and what can we really learn. I wouldn't believe anyone at the moment who claims to have all the right answers in terms of what that landscape is going to look like and how you should do things differently, because I don't think anyone has all the right answers. We certainly don't, but I think there's a lot of things we're keen to look at and test in more detail. And I think this is an opportunity over a few months to go into a bit more detail to do that. And the end goal, obviously, is hopefully to position all of your organisations in a better place over the next 6 months or so. So we've only got spaces for up to 10 people from 10 different organisations, and we're going to run the course over about 5 months in the form of 5 half-day online sessions. I'm going to go into a bit more detail later on about what they'll look like and what we're looking to cover. As I said already, those are the 4 central themes that we've kind of grouped lots of different ideas and thoughts under for the moment, and we'll be exploring some more of those in the Q&A to come shortly. And really, in terms of what we're hoping people will get out of the course, working with us over 5 months or so, it's an opportunity to develop a longer-term recovery plan for your organisation, to really kind of analyse some of the challenges that have come and may still come in the long-term service delivery and funding landscape from COVID-19, and have a really robust plan for dealing with those. As I say, also an opportunity to find those positives and opportunities where they exist, to keep doing things in a different way that might prove better and more cost effective in the long run. We know that a lot of that change management process is about not just having good ideas yourself, but being able to work with colleagues and your board and other key stakeholders in your organisation to actually bring about change. And so we'll be trying to equip you with ways to do that as well. Along the way, we'll be producing various tools and templates to help you do a lot of that. That deliberately, I guess, sounds a little bit vague, because I think one of the key features of this course is we want to get our 10 people together and then really co-design what we do and be really responsive to the challenges you're voicing and the opportunities you're voicing. So actually, we don't want to be too prescriptive at this stage about saying this is exactly what we're going to produce for you, but we've deliberately spaced the sessions out over a few months so we can take some time to respond and produce exactly the things that those specific 10 people are looking for. And finally, we really want to create quite a tight-knit peer support network of 10 people who are like-minded, but as I say, have different perspectives and organisations, and create, if it's not too much of a cliche, a safe space really where people feel comfortable discussing different issues, sharing frustrations they might have internally and externally, and to be able to test new ideas, share ideas with each other, discuss new approaches, and show what they've learned and what they're concerned about, what they're excited about, etc. So creating a group that can keep working together over a period of about 5 months or so, and really get to know each other and trust each other well, and kind of learn from each other's experiences. So those are the aims. I'll come back at the end and talk about the format and the exact approach in a little bit more detail, but I wanted to get going now with our discussion really about the post-COVID landscape, what we can expect, and starting to sort of share a flavour of some of the things we'll be wrestling with in a bit more detail on the course. So if you do have any questions you want to ask us, you're very welcome, as Dave says, to start popping those in the chat box, and we'll come back to some of those. But we also ask people for some questions when they registered for this Q&A, and we've had some really good and interesting ones. So we're gonna start with those. And the first one, Fran, I'm going to direct this question to you, but it was one that came in from Megan, and she asked about will the course explore the prognosis for a second wave of COVID-19 in winter, and also more broadly about the onset of an economic recession and what that might look like for businesses?
That's a big question. And the short answer is yes, we'll explore it. We may not have the answers, but we'll certainly help help you to try and come up with a plan. Obviously, if we end up in a recession, it's going to look different for every business. It's going to depend on what your funding streams look like, what your business model looks like, what your reserves look like. But we will look at risk management. We'll look at business continuity planning. We'll look at how we can help you get to the best possible place that you can be if there is a second wave. We'll look at issues that a recession might bring and how you can mitigate the risk around those. We'll look at business continuity planning to make sure that things are ticking over as best they possibly can be amidst all of this chaos. So we're going to take a bit of a look as well about the funding landscape. We'll look at grants and philanthropy and the impact of COVID on both of those. And likewise, what's happening in terms of funding with COVID and the response to COVID. I think we'll take a look at some service delivery challenges around COVID. What the answer to that is going to very much depend on the individual organisation, but we'll look at what's working for individual organisations and how we can share best practice. These are uncharted waters for everybody, really. So I guess the beauty of the action learning approach that we're going to be taking is that everybody gets an opportunity to share their learning with the group and figure out what's working well and perhaps what's not working quite so well.
I think as well, I've already been asked quite a lot about, when do we think a second wave might come? And much as I would love to say, oh yeah, 12th of October, get ready now. Obviously, that's not something we can do. I think the best medical professionals in the country are struggling to wrestle with that question now. I think the key thing, really, I don't know if you'd agree, Fran, but sort of organisations having nimbleness and agility to almost have a couple of parallel plans ready where you say, right, if there is a second wave and a local lockdown, this is what we'll kick into action straight away with regards to our service delivery and our home working policy and our communications with funders around changes to our projects, and kind of have that ready to go, and almost maybe over the next, I don't know, probably through to next spring at the very least, have a couple of parallel plans that are kind of fleshed out and have buy-in from your board and trustees to kind of flick seamlessly between, because I think it's unlikely but not impossible that we'll have a kind of big nationwide second wave that causes everyone to lock down. I think what's more realistic is there'll be lots of fluctuations and changes in policy locally, and so I think it'll affect all organisations differently based on where they are and what they do. But I think some of the principles around planning for that situation and being ready to put something into action are going to be really, really important.
I think there's something around business continuity plans, being frantically written at the beginning of COVID when this all started. Most business continuity plans probably didn't have this is what we do in the event of a pandemic written in them. So, people were frantically trying to put stuff in place. So now it's an opportunity to sort of pause and look and see whether or not those plans worked the way that they should have worked, and how we can revise and refine them to perhaps make them a bit more responsive for, heaven forbid, the next time that this happens.
Yeah, and I think as well there's quite a lot of understandable wishful thinking at the beginning that this might be a really bad situation that we're in for a couple of months, and I think what you're probably going to see is it has a long tail in terms of a sort of mid or lower level impact, depending on exactly who you are and what you do, but for a much longer period. So I guess it justifies a different sort of approach to long-term strategic planning. And I think we'll come on in some of the questions I know we've had a bit later on to talk about the specific impact of the financial climate on grant funding and things like that as well. Lots of uncertainties, but I think we're starting to see a few patterns in how funders are responding and what they're saying at the moment. So let's come back to that in a few minutes.
So there's a question here from Tony, which I'd like to put to Mike, which is, I want to understand the potential of online delivery more than what we are doing, such as Zoom, and I'm interested in what is available in terms of learning management systems. So bearing in mind our Zoom expertise, Mike, do you want to take that one?
I think the irony is we do have Zoom expertise for the most part. It just chose to be be a bit awkward today. But yeah, I mean, I guess I'd start by answering that from our own experience, because we, until March this year, were running 10 plus face-to-face courses in London with the School for Social Entrepreneurs a year, and lots of other courses with lots of other people as well. And as with a lot of organisations, sort of overnight that stopped, and we quite frantically went through that process of, can we still do them? Should we do them online? How can we change them? You know, bracing ourselves for people saying, you know, that was quite good given the circumstances, but it's never quite the same as face-to-face. And actually, you know, we've been really bowled away by the positive feedback we've had from both training courses and the kind of consultancy strategic planning sessions we do with boards of trustees and things like that, and moving that online. Feedback's been really positive, and so many people have been saying to us, you know, it's great, it's more accessible if I don't live in a big city, or if I have mobility issues, or if I have childcare issues, etc., etc. And so I think we're almost reimagining that whole approach to training and that sort of consultancy online. And there's definitely things that I would have always said pre this year, you know, I'd rather not do that online. I'd rather travel because I think it will just work better face to face. And, you know, there are occasional examples of things that I'm still not convinced work quite as well online. But, you know, for the most part, they work much better than I realised. And the trade-off is increasing accessibility as well. I think the challenge will probably come in the next few months, because I think initially people were very patient and understanding, you know, whether that's people attending our training courses or your service users attending online things that your organisations have been running. And I think people were grateful that they existed full stop, and were very sort of tolerant with the format. I think as time goes by, you know, Zoom fatigue is really going to kick in. People are going to have done a lot of similar things and will be wondering if there's different ways of doing it. And in recent times, I've seen people and organisations experimenting with, so Prezi is one tool I've seen used, Prezi, which is like a way of doing a presentation that's frankly a lot more exciting and engaging than a PowerPoint, where it's sort of on one big screen and you sort of map around. I saw someone last week on Twitter who'd essentially turned all of their presentation into like a virtual museum tour, so as if you're walking through a museum and different sections of it were in like different rooms and stuff. And I've got it on my to-do list to have a good look at it, because I was like, wow, that looks such a great way of freshening things up. So I think there's going to be a need to sort of turn things from temporary products into more permanent products, and you know, that comes with its challenges. But the good news is, if you're not doing things face to face anymore or as much, then you've hopefully got a bit more time, a bit more budget, a bit more creativity to put into to doing some of those things. But I think the key is going to really be, I think, you know, people can be a bit like magpies in that we all gravitate towards the new shiny objects and the new software and the new tools and things like that. And I think those things are important, but the key thing is really to understand your audience. So, you know, your online delivery might be a service for your service users or a product for your customers or whatever it might be, but really understanding what their needs are, what their barriers are, what concerns they might have about doing things online, and then finding tools that help you to fulfill that brief, rather than going, here's something that looks shiny and exciting and I'm going to use that without really understanding how it'll affect our product. So I think those are a few starting ideas, but I think, yeah, I'd say, you know, committing to doing things online for a longer period, and therefore justifying putting more time, potentially money and creativity into it, and really having a good understanding of your audience, and then what tools help you to produce what they need and expect. And I think, again, you know, the advantage of our course in working with people over a period of several months is it's not just saying, here's an idea, go away and try it, and then we never get any feedback, but saying, you know, let's find some people who in their organisation feel they're well placed to trial a new online fundraising product, or trial a new way of delivering an online exercise class for their service users or something like that, and then gathering feedback with those people over a few months to say what worked, what didn't work, what can other organisations learn that they can do differently in future. So it's sort of meant to be a genuine sort of learning circle and network, rather than just, you know, here's some tips and go away and try them in your own time.
Well, that sort of leads quite nicely into the next question, Mike. So this has come from quite a few different people, and it's actually come up a few times before we put together the course, which I guess was part of the inspiration for doing that. So the question is, what opportunities are out there for organisations to learn from COVID-19 and to continue to do things better, rather than just going back to normal?
Yeah, so I mean, I think this is what a lot of organisations are concerned with at the moment, and it's one of the main reasons why we've launched this course, because I think, you know, I'm not going to play down the fact that it's been a really, really difficult few months for people personally and for their organisations, and that there's been a lot of damage and trauma done by a lot of that, but I don't think that changes the fact that there are opportunities and ideas in there and things that I guess organisations have been forced to have a go at out of necessity because they haven't really had a choice, but now they can look at and say, I'm just going to shut a window behind me because I'm literally getting blown away here. Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, I think there's things that we need to be picking up on that and continuing to learn from. So, I mean, we could pick any number of areas as an example of that. I think I've just covered online service delivery, but for me, the whole remote working and office culture is a really key area. You know, I say that as someone who's worked from home for 5 or 6 years and had endless conversations with friends who say, I'd never want to do that, I'd never get anything done. And, you know, so many societal problems we have around public transport and the environment could be massively changed from people sort of working from home more. And I think as the voluntary sector, we kind of have a moral responsibility to play a role in leading on that. So I think, you know, starting to think about speaking to your staff about what they've learned over the last few months, you know, working from home might have given them more flexibility around childcare. It might have helped them if they have health problems or mobility problems, or they might have found it really difficult and been worried about security, the equipment they have, confidentiality, etc. But I think, you know, it's really easy to think of a lot of those problems as sort of unsolvable, but then you see organisations that are sitting there with an office costing sort of tens or hundreds of £1,000s a year on their budget. And I think if you were to do an exercise around what your staff wanted longer term and what they might need to work from home, then probably for the fraction of a cost of having an office, you can give everyone a state-of-the-art laptop and high security software and a really good desk and chair and that kind of thing, and meeting rooms that are available if they're needed for certain things. So I'm not saying that's the way all organisations should go or could go, but I think that's an example of an area where there really is an opportunity to stop and say, hang on, we've been doing things in a way out of necessity that haven't been perfect, but how can we now improve that approach with a bit more time and planning and come up with something that might be cheaper for our organisation, might allow us to attract staff from a wider geographical area, so being able to benefit from different skills and experiences, and then sort of mapping out some of the challenges and opportunities. And I think, you know, again, this is why we want to get a group of people together to consider these things over a few months, and also not all from the same size of organisation, because I think different types of organisations will bring different benefits to this process for us. So I think larger organisations have a bit more muscle, as it were, to sort of put a budget behind something or put some human resources behind creating a remote working policy or surveying 50 staff or whatever. But I think smaller organisations have that ability sometimes to just do things and get on with them quickly and not have to go through 3 or 4 months of sign-off processes. So I guess I'm hoping that we can get a group of people that kind of marry the benefits of both those approaches and who are willing to sort of start to test things out in their organisation, maybe with a bit of support from some others as well. So that's just one area. I mean, I don't know, Fran, if there's any others you'd pick up on as sort of benefiting from that same longer term thought process.
I think it's about the space to think these things through. I mean, when I was working as a CEO, I spent countless hours having these conversations before the pandemic about, you know, should we work from home? Do we need more office space? Should we move? What office do we need? How many desks do we have to have? How do people feel about hot desking? What are those kinds of things? And trying to marry up everybody's wants and needs and requirements and their ability to do their job is really challenging. And then all of a sudden we're thrown into the midst of a pandemic and everybody's forced into this situation. So you're taking a debate that's been going on for as long as I've worked in the sector, as long as the internet has been around, you know, do we need to be in the office, and suddenly trying to solve it overnight. So I think, you know, the opportunity to just have a chat about the things that are coming up, the issues that are coming up within your organisation, people's concerns about working from home and how that impacts on their mental health and their ability to do their job, as much as the cost savings of moving out of the office and investing in tech and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, just to give people the space and the opportunity to talk to other people, because when you're in the midst of it and you've got everybody's kind of conflicting thoughts and opinions, it's really difficult to move forward and to make a decision.
Yeah, and to pick up another specific area that I think a lot of organisations are wrestling with at the moment, we also had a question which was about some concerns about how organisations who have traditionally generated a lot of income or significant income from their physical space can kind of adapt, I guess, in post-COVID and deal with concerns around social distancing. And, you know, is that something we're going to cover, and any tips for how you can keep on making your space work for you financially?
Yeah, so I mean, charity trading is one of my pet subjects, and I think there's a lot of scope for charities to expand and to diversify their income streams based on trading. Obviously, at this point in time, you know, a lot have bigger fish to fry and other concerns. But looking at, you know, how income generating models have worked for you in the past and whether they need to be adapted, whether they need to be changed or could offer more potential, is something that we can look at. And there's the benefit of having the space and the peer support to discuss those ideas and talk them through and perhaps come up with some solutions or some ideas that you hadn't had previously, might be beneficial. And that kind of, I guess that ties in then to the broader funding landscape question, and how, you know, different aspects of fundraising are going to be affected by what's going on at the moment, and how you might look to diversify or mitigate those risks around loss of income, particularly if it's something that's been a substantial source of income generation for you in the past. And as Mike said previously, we're going to look at different tools that will help with that process. So understanding a bit more about the impact on your funding streams and how you can diversify and mitigate. Obviously looking at your strategic planning and how your kind of income generation and fundraising strategy tie into your wider strategic objectives, how you can risk assess and manage the risks in a formalised way and get your board approval on that, and how all that impacts on the budget as well.
I think one of the challenges with a physical space, if you want to keep using it to generate income, is modelling out what you feel you need to do in terms of health and safety precautions and what they might cost, and also really thinking about how that relates to your service group and your customers or whoever they are and what they're concerned about. Because I feel at the moment you're seeing lots of physical spaces just jump on lots of things that are almost more about marketing and reassuring people that it's safe to come back rather than protecting their safety. So I always have a chuckle. I just down my road is a local gym that I walk past quite a lot, and they've clearly invested so much time in coming up with this beautiful one-way directional walking system, and you kind of think, but you're all in this confined space, breathing and sharing air, and I can't really imagine that, you know, all of this signage and directions and all of that sort of really address the main issue. So I guess it's about not just doing things for the sake of it, but thinking about which ones are necessary. And, you know, that might mean you don't do some things that other people are doing because they don't feel important to you. Equally, it might feel that there's things that other venues aren't doing that are really important for your customers or service users. So I think there's a challenge there to kind of come up with a proper system rather than what we're seeing at the moment, which is commercial venues just sort of doing all the things that they think will get people back, whether they truly address safety concerns or not.
It's advantageous if you've got the money to throw at that stuff as well, obviously, but we know that that's not necessarily the case in our sector. So we want to be a bit more strategic about how we make those decisions.
Yeah, and the best things might not always be the most expensive things as well. So I think that's where you've got to kind of cut through the noise a little bit.
Absolutely. Have we got time for another question? Are we okay? Yeah,
I think we're okay. Just a reminder to anyone, if you do want to ask any other questions, either generally about the landscape or follow-up questions to what we discussed, then do post them in the chat, and Dave will be feeding them through to us in a bit. We'll probably focus on questions about the landscape first, and then come back to anything specifically about the course after that.
So we've got a question here from Janice. In fact, this is about the grant funding landscape. So Janice has asked about the future of the grant funding landscape and how competitive do we think it will be, and how to get the passion of your organisation to shine through in any applications. Mike, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I do, and we run a one-day Trust and Foundations fundraising course already that goes into a lot more detail about the Trust and Foundations process. So, I mean, I'll briefly touch on that, but then I think what's interesting is the broader landscape and what we're expecting might happen in the next few months. I mean, I think, you know, we always say passion's really important in funding applications, and I think a lot of people speak to an individual donor in one way, and then when they're contacting a trust, sort of see it as this faceless organization that doesn't make decisions based on emotion and things like that. But I think communicating your passion is really important, and particularly doing that through case studies, stories, etc. And again, there's opportunities and challenges in the current climate around not seeing people face to face, but creativity needed on how you gather that information, how you share that information, etc. But I think particularly in a tough financial climate, I think one of the things that is a shame but unavoidable is that a lot of funders are going to be sort of defaulting back to a safe pair of hands. So the last thing they're going to want at the moment is organisations that take a grant and can't deliver the work, or that they don't think have the substance to kind of go with their idea. So I think this is always important, but more than ever, being able to communicate your passion and the why, and to grab someone's attention, a funder's attention initially, but then really back it up with really good impact assessment and robust governance and a plan for how you're financially resilient through the next few months. And I think some of the narrative around how your organisations adapted and pivoted post-COVID, certainly with the organisations we're working with currently on bid writing, and something I've really tried to say is, I know as someone who's semi behind the scenes in your organisation, that you've done so much thinking around when do we get people back face to face, and how do we make them feel comfortable, and how do we adapt that service. And, again, coming back to online service delivery, there's new ways to reach people, but there's new challenges posed in terms of safeguarding, accessibility. Some people have needs that are a bit more challenging in an online format, etc. And I know loads of organisations have thought about that, but they've not necessarily sort of demonstrated that thinking and given themselves credit for it in their funding application. So I think it's about showing that you're not just a great organisation in general, but that you're sort of on top of things in the current climate, and that you have a really good working relationship with your service users. You're a listening organisation, you're hearing their concerns and developing things in response to what they're looking for is all more important than ever. So I think those are some starting points. I think there's a few broader trends that we're going to be keen to explore on the course. So two things I'd just pick up on quickly. I think firstly, we've had several months of emergency funding, and it's been branded very clearly as emergency funding, quick out the door, simple application forms, reduced reporting requirements, frontline work for people directly affected by COVID. And we're seeing more and more funders not only switch back to normal now, but almost go beyond that in the other direction and say, hold on, there's all kinds of issues like the environment and campaigning and things like that have probably dropped off the agenda in the last few months while we've all been focused on COVID. So we're seeing that switch from sort of emergency and funding and crisis funding to recovery funding. I know the phrase that the government's been using is that sort of building back better approach and green recovery and that kind of thing, which isn't necessarily the language I'd use, but I guess there's a shift towards sort of putting longer term issues back on the agenda. So that's something for your organisation to think about. And then also just the financial question, which we covered in another course we run recently, but to what extent is the money that's been given away as emergency funding in the last few months, has it come out of a general grant giving budget, which means that funder might now be giving substantially less for the year ahead, or has it come out of their endowment and their investment, which means their short-term grant giving can probably continue at a regular level, but longer term they might be facing difficult decisions about how they keep generating enough income to sustain grant giving over the next 5 years or so. And I would love to be able to say this is what funders are doing, but out of those who are sort of publicly talking about that sort of thing on their website, we're seeing a real mixture, and some are clearly doing their best to sustain grant giving at previous levels, and others have said, we're now going to close for 6 months or reduce grant giving for a year while we sort of build back up our grant giving levels. So I think those are two things I'm keen to keep exploring once we get onto the course itself, because I'm speaking to quite a few funders, but I know every organisation will be speaking to a different set of funders, and I think continuing to map out that landscape, what are funders looking for and how much money do they have available for grants is going to be really, really interesting.
Thanks for that, Mike. So there's a question here. Oh, no, actually, I tell a lie. Go on. I think I was going to take this next one.
Yeah. There's one more we've got, and then I'll hand over to Dave if he's got anything to add, or again, reminder if you've got any other questions, ask them. But Tracy asked a question, Fran, around what resources might be available to help our organisation to develop a 100% digital fundraising strategy in future.
Well, it kind of ties in with the question that we looked at earlier around digital resources, and there's lots of stuff on the market that will help with scheduling a campaign and putting together a campaign, and there are free tools and there are paid for tools and all that kind of stuff, which we can certainly look at, and I'm sure other people will have experience that we don't necessarily have in that respect. I guess something that would be worth looking at, I think, is the cultural change around digital fundraising. It's a new area for a lot of organisations, and many organisations have done a bit of it in the past, but not much of it. So I'm interested in I guess Tracy's question about moving to a 100% digital fundraising strategy is interesting, because I'm kind of trying to understand about why other forms of fundraising aren't necessarily fitting into that strategy, and how then that culture, that transitional culture, is managed. So there's something around the way that an organisation communicates with its supporters digitally. If you put something in writing, it's out there, it's in the void, it's on the internet, and it's a permanent thing. So I know that that's a challenge for a lot of boards and a lot of CEOs, kind of relinquishing that control and allowing that dialogue to happen visually. So I guess it would be worth also looking at sort of reasons behind the 100% commitment, and whether or not there are other types of fundraising that could be incorporated into a digital strategy or into a fundraising strategy more broadly. I know, Mike, you mentioned the other day that there's been a bit of a renaissance around other forms of fundraising that we haven't seen for a while, so mailing and letters and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, we did again with the School for Social Entrepreneurs at the start of July, I think, or mid-July, I think it was, fundraising during COVID-19 briefing event, where we had about 4 or 5 speakers from different charities in different specialist areas of fundraising. And the person who spoke about individual giving on the day said that her charity and others she was working with had seen quite a lot of success come from just going back to picking up the phone to donors and that kind of thing, and postal appeals, and where that kind of thing was previously not getting traction. All of those things can keep happening at a time of social distancing, and actually they were finding that supporters were responding more positively to getting phone calls while they were in lockdown. Maybe people just bored out of their minds and haven't heard from a different voice in a week, and suddenly a phone call is received slightly differently. So I guess on the digital strategy side, I would say yes, absolutely, it's a really important area to be considering at a time when face-to-face activities might not get back to normal for potentially a very long time. But not being able to do things face-to-face doesn't mean that digital is the only solution that can work. And in terms of a 100% digital strategy, I think if this crisis has taught us anything, it's that 100% in any direction isn't really the right way to go. Fran, you and I did a podcast a few months ago for our new podcast series talking about trading income, and I know when I put that out there, an organisation who are on my mailing list got back to me and said, well, it's interesting you talk about the importance of diversifying trading income, because we 10 years ago took the decision under pressure from funders to focus almost exclusively on trading income rather than grant income, and suddenly in March all of our facilities were closed, and actually we've lost a lot more income than we would have lost if we'd been grant dependent. And I had a chat to him and said, it's really interesting to see that, but I think that shows, rather than sort of one thing being right rather than another, it just, you shouldn't have all your eggs in one basket, and you should have a sort of balanced fundraising portfolio as much as possible. So I think that would be one of my bits of advice to Tracy. And I think finally, if we've got time, the other point I always make about online fundraising and digital fundraising is it can be very successful, but it kind of requires you to reframe certain rules about how fundraising works, because I think some of the best online fundraising platforms, people like Facebook have a brilliant set of giving tools that I've seen work really well for organizations, and ditto with some crowdfunding platforms where you can raise a lot of money very quickly, but the trade-off is around data and consent. So all of that fundraising will happen on Facebook. People will never leave Facebook. They'll never give their contact details in a way that can be shared with your organization. So the age-old fundraising approach of let's ask someone for £5 now and then send them a really good follow-up mailing and convert them into donating £5 a month on an ongoing basis doesn't translate that well to online fundraising, where you're getting a fraction of the amount of donor data. So it almost requires a whole new approach around making it very sort of transactional and quick fire, and it's harder to build a supporter base. You know, you can build a following on Facebook, but are they engaged with you in the same way a newsletter following would be, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's something else we'd look to explore if we had people that were really keen on sort of looking more at digital fundraising on the course.
That's great.
Anything you'd add to that, Fran, or should we open it up now?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Just as I said, you know, the challenges around digital fundraising are often around culture, so around kind of making sure that your digital aims align with your strategic aims and align with what's expected of people within the organisation. I know that's been a challenge in my experience with smaller teams who haven't necessarily got a committed digital fundraiser or a committed fundraising team at all. You know, who takes responsibility for social media? What do they say? What type of things are they supposed to be posting? It's quite a challenge, and sometimes there's conflicting ideas and it can cause some friction internally, I guess. So it'd be interesting to explore that.
Yeah. Dave, do you want to come in on anything else at this point?
Yeah, we've got a question. It leads into the next section around the course itself and the structure. But it's a question from Nigel, which is 30% of social enterprises and charities are expected to close before spring 2021. Why isn't the course therefore done over a few weeks rather than 6 months? I know, Mike, when we spoke and when we were planning the course, we did feel it was important to allow space between sessions for people to take ideas, to go back to their organisations, to reflect and to put some of the learning into practice. Anything that you'd sort of add to that, or in terms of the course length?
I guess our thinking is really a reflection on what we think organisations need at the moment, but also what's out there already. So I'm very aware that there's organisations that are in sort of short-term financial difficulties and need to raise money quickly or do something sort of very urgently for their survival. I do think there's other things out there. So as I mentioned, you know, we do a regular one-day fundraising strategy course and a one-day trust and foundations course. So I felt that what we wanted to do is something a little bit different to those kind of quick fix courses that are out there already. And exactly as you say, Dave, I think it's really important for us to allow enough time between sessions for people to actually take stuff away and make meaningful progress in their own organisations and say, I've tried this, this is how my board responded, this is how our service users responded, this is how we tried to fix it, and this is what we've learned as a result. And I guess, you know, I also know that people coming on the course will be exceptionally busy at a busy time and, you know, aren't probably going to have the opportunity to do much follow-up work in the space of a week or two. So I think it was both to allow time between the sessions, but also work with people over a longer period of time. And, you know, what I don't want to do is have lots of interesting conversations with organisations in September and early October, and then find there's a big change in the landscape in October or November that invalidates a lot of that, and we've kind of left people without so much ability to adapt. So I think it's working with people over a slightly longer time period to try things and to adapt to the landscape and see how it's changing, really.
Great. No, and I think it's important to just to highlight that it's perhaps not so much of an emergency intervention, this course, but more about long-term strategic planning and building for the future in the post-COVID-19 landscape, rather than responding immediately to problems and issues that COVID has sort of brought to immediate work day to day.
Yeah, and I think it's probably fair to say that, you know, it might not be the right course for everyone, and if what you need is that urgent shot in the arm within the next few weeks, then you might at the very least want to look at some sort of short-term courses alongside it. But yeah, that's exactly it. I think it's about working with people over a longer-term period rather than just sort of the quick fixes to the challenges I know a lot of people had. Dave, I know we also had a question coming from someone who registered really late in the day. I can't remember the exact question, but around sort of broader income generation as well, or social investment, I think.
Yes, we did, and it was just asking whether social investment would be covered on the course as a sort of alternative income stream.
Yeah, I mean, at the risk of sort of re-emphasizing what we said a few times already, like we really want to make this responsive to the people that are on the course, and part of the reason why we want to keep it to a small group is to be able to be responsive to the kind of issues and challenges and opportunities that are bringing. So I can't say it'll be on the course if no one's on the course who's got an interest in it, but if they have, and if it emerges as an issue that's worth exploring further, then yes, I think absolutely. And I think what's interesting now is sometimes it takes a crisis to sort of focus minds on things like diversifying income and really give a kind of real life example of why it's absolutely necessary. And I think that's one of the things that can come out of COVID-19 is more than ever sort of your directors or boards of trustees should be recognizing the need to have lots of different income streams. And I think, you know, we were already in a really tough climate for public fundraising and grants and contracts. And I think sadly in the wake of COVID-19, that's only going to increase. So I think it's a good opportunity to build a business case for some alternative forms of investment and income. And now's really the time to do that. So I think, yes, absolutely. That's something we'll cover if there's interest there. I don't know if you'd add anything to that, Fran.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. I think, you know, sometimes the risk of doing nothing is greater than the risk of acting, even if that risk is, you know, somewhat unclear. So, you know, there's a conversation, the conversation will be happening all over the country with boards of trustees about, you know, we should be thinking about this, we should be diversifying, we should be looking to social investment. You know, all of those kinds of conversations are really difficult. So if we can help you to have those conversations and support you to develop those business cases and make a convincing argument and demonstrate how you'll mitigate that risk, then yeah, we'll certainly do that.
And I think part of a good business case is case studies as well. So, you know, we can't always promise it, but depending on what comes up, you know, we can also use some of our experience to say, and the trouble is sometimes people aren't willing to share this information, but, you know, here's an example of an organisation, and Fran, you'll have examples of organisations, particularly with regards to trading, including the one you used to run, where you actually made that brave decision ahead of time to invest in trading income and different forms of revenue, not because you had an urgent, immediate fundraising crisis and you had to raise that money within 10 minutes, but about longer term organisational positioning. And I imagine that's changed the situation that charity's now in post-COVID. So, you know, we can also look for examples of that kind of thing to help you convince your board that this is something that is worth investing a bit of money in.
Absolutely, yeah. I've had those conversations. I know how challenging they can be. I know how long they can take. And, you know, having gone through the process a couple of times, I can see the advantages of doing it. And yeah, the charity that I work for is in a much different position now than it would have been post-COVID otherwise, because it had that to fall back on. So yeah, I think it's a really important conversation to have.
And in my experience, as soon as you try and launch a new area of fundraising or new way of generating income for your organisation, the first thing people do in relation to sort of risk management is say, what's the risk of this backfiring and us investing some money in it and it not working? And obviously that's valid, but I think particularly post a pandemic, you need to also say, well, what's the risk in us not trying any of these new things and still being 85-95% dependent on grants and contracts in 2 or 3 years' time when the next crisis hits the sector. And I've seen a lot of organisations who've been so risk averse, they almost haven't avoided the biggest risk of all, which is not diversifying and being massively vulnerable to something happening as a result.
Yeah, I mean, one of the fundamental questions on a business case should always be what happens if you do nothing, and too often it's not there.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think we've had anything else come in at the moment that sort of tackles something we haven't talked about already. So we'll move on to the last part and talk a bit more about the format of the course. But if you do have any other questions, do feel free to post them in the chat box and we'll tackle them again at the end. So a bit more information about the course, and I will say this has been a little bit hard to put together because we want it to be so responsive to the people on it. I'm conscious that in a few areas we can't be as specific as we'd like to be, but I'll do my best on this. So a recap, we've talked about having 5 half-day sessions, so I think they're all scheduled for the morning with like a half-hour break in the middle, starting towards the end of September, and then we've got a couple of relatively quick-fire sessions in November and December. We've then got a break for Christmas in January, because I know that's a busy time for a lot of organisations and or people are on leave, so that gives a bit more time for sort of starting to test things a bit more detail. And then we've got the final 2 sessions at the start of February and March. And just a reminder that we're going to try and structure the whole thing around these 4 central themes, so future funding models, financial planning and strategic planning, which includes things like risk assessment, contingency plans, etc., the future of service delivery, and collaboration and working culture. And we've talked more today about working culture in relation to remote working and that kind of thing, but I think also something we're really keen to cover is, you know, the future of volunteering. We've seen a huge rush in very centralised, government supported or local authority volunteering, which has made a lot of people think that they want to do volunteering, but in my experience has caused quite a lot of frustration around organisations that don't really have a great link to the charity sector, recruiting this massive bank of volunteers and then almost thinking, great, we've got loads of volunteers, but then not having anything for them to do because they're not sort of plugged into the sector. So I think there's challenges and opportunities around the increase in volunteering and how you can tap into that as an organisation, and you know, whether you can sort of have your own volunteers or whether you should be working more collaboratively with other volunteering organisations and that kind of thing. So that's another aspect there that we'd like to come back to. The way we're going to try and structure this, so the first session we do at the end of September will really be looking across all 4 of those central themes I've just talked about, and collectively coming up first with potentially quite a long list of both challenges and opportunities in the current landscape that organisations want to focus on, based on the 10 people and 10 organisations we have in a room. We'll then be doing a horizon scanning exercise where we sort of look at all of those possible trends and developments in terms of how likely they are to happen and how much impact they'll have on the charity sector, and decide which ones to focus on for those people who are in those sessions with us. And then we'll agree to next steps. So we want to try and encourage people to take ownership of the challenges and opportunities that feel particularly relevant to their organisation, and ultimately to start testing them in their organisation. But initially that might involve, you know, different people doing research in specific areas or having internal discussions with your service delivery teams, consulting your service users, etc., just to put a bit more shape on the problem and think about how it'll affect your organisation. Sessions 2 and 3 in November and December are going to be very similar in format, but we're going to split them according to the theme. So we're going to have one focused on funding, financial and strategic planning, and then a parallel session focused on service delivery, collaboration and working culture. And that'll be about bringing people back together after a month or two's background work and further refining and defining what those challenges and opportunities are for our specific group. So, you know, I've spoken to my board or my service delivery team or my service users, and this is what they think we really need to be focusing on. So just tightening up what those things are. And then really working as a group, and this is where the collaborative approach really comes in to formulate, you know, how do we want to respond to these things? Are there any particular hypotheses we want to test in our organisation, which could be things like, we think we'll be more efficient as an organisation if we move to close our office in the next few months and come up with a proper infrastructure for remote working, or, you know, we're going to aim over the next year for a blended approach of, if social distancing allows 50% of our service delivery online and 50% face-to-face or something like that, and actually developing those things into clearer ideas where, again, different people take ownership of different issues, but all of us help to flesh them out for them in a bit more detail. And we'll then really clearly make sure that those things are kind of assigned to specific participants. So, you know, one person who feels the issue they really want to look at in their organisation is coming up with a big new online fundraising event and not focusing on any face-to-face fundraising events for the next year, or whatever it might be. I'm completely making it up, but we kind of have people who are committing to do something because it's relevant for their organisation, but also it can generate learning that the rest of the group can use in future. So There won't really be any work between session 2 and 3. They're more about doing that same process across those different areas, but to give a fuller range of challenges and opportunities for the group to work on. And then we've deliberately allowed a bit more time between sessions 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 to go away, actually implement and test things in your organisation, come back again with the split for the sessions based on those central themes and reflect on progress, you know, what has been working well for us, what hasn't, what unexpected challenges have we faced. And we are going to expect to be in sort of regular contact with you between the sessions before Christmas and the ones after Christmas to really understand the things you're wrestling with. And I think that's where there's an opportunity for Fran and I to introduce more tools, templates, frameworks, etc., that we use in our day-to-day work with other organisations in response to your feedback. And, you know, if you're saying what you really need is a really good template for a contingency plan in the wake of a second wave, or a business case for investing in increasing trading, or a structure for a workshop session to look at social investment or that kind of thing, we can kind of advise you on those approaches and develop sort of more bespoke tools and templates for that. And then at the end of that process, what we want to do is pull all of that learning back together and give you an action plan. And this is where we said, you know, we almost want this to be a blueprint for the sector recovering from COVID-19, where we say, this is what we were facing at the beginning, this is what we learned, this is what we've done, this is how we're refining the plan, and this is an action plan for you to keep developing these things in your organisation. So that's the broad structure. I wanted to really quickly, because I know we're almost over on time now, to answer a few questions that came in advance about the format. So we had a question, you know, will there be exercises or homework in inverted commas between sessions? I've said yes. I mean, I guess it's less about sort of specific exercises and homework, but more about, you know, the real aim of this course is to give you a framework and the confidence to identify ideas with like-minded people and test them out in your organisation, look at new approaches, resources that you need, discussions you need to have, etc., etc. So in a sense, the homework is doing all of that work, and, you know, we will probably try and standardise some tips on how you go about doing that and a format for reporting back to the group so that we can all learn from that. But yeah, we are expecting quite a lot of work to happen between the sessions, but hopefully it's work that you would be wanting to do in your organisation anyway. And a kind of related area is about support that will be available between and alongside sessions. So our plan at the moment is to create a closed group, probably on LinkedIn, that can serve as a discussion forum, but again, just for those 10 people who are on the course. And we'll create an online resources section on something like Google Drive. So if people are developing, you know, working from home policy, or if they've done an exercise to scope out and compare different online platforms and stuff like that, we can share a lot of those resources and pool them, so you can, the idea is you can learn a lot more in a lot less time than you would be if you're having to do all of that work in your own organisation. That closed group won't be sort of formally moderated as such, but we'll certainly be dipping in to contribute feedback, etc., etc. And, you know, it's an opportunity for you to share ideas, challenges and questions. And we'll also be available, you know, if you want to have a chat between sessions, if there's something you're struggling with and the group hasn't been able to help. I think particularly if I go back to the schedule, I think particularly between sessions 2 and 3 and 4 and 5, that big gap where you're really doing a lot of the work and learning quite a lot from it will be where we particularly want to help you with that. Something that a couple of people asked, and I can understand the reason why, was can we change attendees between certain sessions? And if we've got someone from our, you know, if our service manager would be best placed to come to a session, can we send them instead? It's a really good question, and we've debated it quite a lot. I think there's pros and cons. I think one of the things that's really important to us for this course, and the reason why we're doing it differently as a longer term thing, is we want to create that group that can really support each other. And, you know, as part of this process, you'll be sharing some detailed and potentially sensitive information about your organisation. So we want people to feel comfortable doing that. And also, I know feedback from previous things is where you're subbing people in and out. You know, they don't necessarily fully understand the ground rules of the group or the approach we're taking, and it can sort of bog down the detail a little bit. So unless there's an exceptional case for it, we want to keep it as the same 10 attendees. But, you know, We want every participant to be from a separate organisation, so you're kind of signing up on behalf of your organisation anyway. So we will record all of the sessions. You can share the recordings with all of your colleagues. You can share the resources that you produce. They can listen back to something, etc., etc. So we want that to benefit other people as well, but we do want the same people, if possible, to be coming to all of the sessions, because I think it will create a much stronger group dynamic, and certainly that's the feedback from similar things previously. And in terms of what type of people and organisations will be signing up, we really are going for a mixture of roles, structures, turnovers, cause areas, etc. And as I said earlier, we do want to have some organisations that are smaller and more agile and nimble to do things quickly, and we want to combine that with the muscle of some larger organisations as well. So we were hoping to do a few poll questions to gather a bit more information about the people on the call today. I think given that we've run over a little bit, and I know a few people had to leave at 12, we'll probably leave that bit for now. You know, if you do have specific questions about that, you're more than welcome to contact us, and we'll give you a bit more information about the type of people who are signing up. At the moment, we were sort of feeding everyone into this Q&A today, so I think it's over the next week or two that we'll start to get a better idea of who signed up. But you know, I deliberately want it to be a mix. I don't think we want it to be a learning circle all within one cause area or all medium-sized organisations, because I actually think what will come out of that will be less rich as a result. However, I see it very much as Fran and I's job as facilitators to kind of bring that whole process together and to design sessions that are relevant for organisations of different sizes, and to help you as participants to pick out the common learning and say, you know, organisation A over here experienced this, but you know, is that because of the type of organisation they are, or is that a general learning point that can apply to others as well? So we want a real mixed bag, and we'll do the hard work to make sure that's as relevant as possible.